In spite of not being the fastest sim racer, time trialling is something I have always really enjoyed in sim racing. While nothing beats the thrill of wheel-to-wheel racing, I would argue that there's no truer test of a driver's raw ability than seeing how fast they are over a single lap. Plus, there's just something so satisfying about grinding out lap after lap until you finally put one together that you're happy with. Even though I'm primarily a PC sim racer these days, my love of hot lapping is something that keeps me coming back to Gran Turismo 7, and more specifically, its online time trials. Back when GT7 was my main sim of choice, yes, I said sim, deal with it, I would attempt most of these time trials. However, these days, I only really participate if they feature a car and track combination I find interesting. And the recent event featuring the Group 2 cars at Circuit Gilles Villeneuve was certainly interesting enough to get me to fire up the PlayStation for the first time in ages. Usually when I participate in these time trials, I try and achieve the goal time, and once I have, I usually don't spend any time trying to improve further. However, this time round, I'm going to try something a bit different. At my skill level, achieving an outright record isn't really in reach. However, I've always wondered whether, if I kept at it and really tried, could I set a lap good enough to reach the top 100 in a GT7 time trial? Well, that's what we're going to find out. One of the things that attracted me to this particular time trial was the use of Group 2 cars, as Group 2 is probably my favourite class of cars in GT7. Fortunately for me, Group 2 clearly isn't one of Polyphony Digital's favourite classes. Any GT7 player will tell you that Group 2 is a bit of a mess. Over the life of the game, it has basically become a catch-all for all racing cars too fast to be in Group 3, but not quite fast enough to be in Group 1. This means that instead of being loosely comparable to a real-life regulation set, as Group 3 and Group 4 are to GT3 and GT4 cars respectively, Group 2 encompasses an awkward mix of cars never designed to compete with one another in real life. This includes modern Class 1 GT cars such as the 2010s GT500 cars from Super GT, the 2019 Audi RS5 DTM, and some older Super GT cars, as well as GT1 cars from the late 1990s, such as the McLaren F1 GTR, Mercedes CLK GTR, and Toyota GT1. The wide variety of cars in this class basically means that it is impossible to get the BOP right. Recently, they have been splitting this class out for events by only allowing the Super GT cars or GT1s to enter, but then that begs the question, why put them in the same class in the first place? Anyway, in spite of its flaws, I really like Group 2. Their high downforce means that they have good front grip and rotation without sacrificing rear stability. And maybe it's just a skill issue on my part, but this seems to suit my driving style way better than Group 3. While this class doesn't come up often in sport mode, when it does, I tend to do well. For races, I'm currently a B-class driver, and Group 2 races are the only time I have achieved wins and podiums in B. On the time trial side, my first ever gold in GT7 was the Group 2 cars at Suzuka. As for the track, I haven't played GT7 much since Circuit Gilles Villeneuve was added last December. I vaguely know my way around this track from old F1 games, but the added challenge of learning a new circuit was also appealing. The goal of time trials in GT7 is to beat the bronze, silver and gold target times. However, these times are dynamic, as they are determined by what percentage they are off the top time. Usually, bronze is 10% over, silver is 5% and gold is 3%. For most time trials, gold times usually don't come easy for me, but when I have the time and patience to chase the gold, I'm usually able to achieve it within a few hours. However, going beyond this is not something I've ever really tried, that is, until now. The goal of my first run wasn't really to set a good time, but rather to try and blow off the cobwebs, since it has been so long since I last played GT7. Recently I've mainly been playing Le Mans Ultimate, not that I'm super good at that, but the driving style in this game is obviously a bit different from GT7, with very different physics and a far more realistic approach to the sim overall. So yeah, it took a while to get back into it. I go out for my first stint, which lasts 8 laps, with a 1:28 being my fastest time, which was only good enough for bronze, unfortunately. At the time of my first attempt, 1:27.1 was the time for silver, and 1:25.5 was the time required for gold. At this point, it began to sink in just how difficult this challenge was going to be. I knew I was still getting up to speed with the car, track, and the game itself, but even so, it was a rude awakening to be this far off. At this point, I decided to review some replays of faster times to see which areas of the lap I should focus on improving first. I hate the term low-hanging fruit, but that's essentially the approach we're taking at this stage. If you're multiple seconds off the top times, the best way to make some initial improvements is to review some faster times compared to your own, and see what they are doing differently. You'll probably find implementing a few of these will yield massive gains. For me, these early improvements usually come from seeing which lines the top drivers are taking. You may have heard of the phrase, use all of the track when trying to improve your pace in sim racing. Well, in GT7, gains can often be made from using all of the track and then some. This was especially relevant to this time trial. Circuit Gilles Villeneuve is primarily made up of chicanes, and a lot of the top times were gaining a lot of speed through maximising the curbs on these chicanes, sometimes to extreme lengths. Me and curbs in GT7 have a bit of a love-hate relationship. On one hand, knowing where to use them can help you gain valuable lap time, and nailing them is incredibly satisfying. On the other hand, due to the game's physics, curbs can be incredibly unforgiving. Racing cars in this game feel incredibly stiff, which can cause them to bounce uncontrollably when the car gets unsettled over curbs. You'll often hear racing drivers, real and virtual, talk about finding the limit, which basically means finding the limit of grip in a particular situation, as this limit is where the maximum pace can be extracted. Oftentimes, to find the limit, one must first overstep the limit. In real life, this can have painful and expensive consequences. In sim racing, overstepping the limit and spinning or crashing can be rectified with a tap of the restart button, with the driver's limbs and bank balance both remaining intact. And I know this, but for some reason, spinning over curbs in GT7 is really frustrating to me, way more so than in other sims. It could just be a lack of practice with the game, but I find these incidents quite hard to predict, and I find it frustrating when I think I should be able to save it but can't. Anyway, I think because of this, my instinct is to avoid using curbs, even though it is essential to achieving good times at a lot of circuits. In my early attempts, I also found the throttle response of the car to be quite strange. I opted for the NSX GT500 car, which has a 2-litre inline-4 engine, the same engine size and configuration as many family runabouts. In contrast to most family runabouts, however, this car has over 600 horsepower, thanks to its gargantuan turbo. And with big turbo comes big turbo lag. Due to this, you don't get a lot of power until you have quite a lot of throttle applied and the turbo is spooled up. When it is spooled up, it's very easy to get wheel spin in low gears on corner exit. I noticed some of the faster drivers short shifting to combat this, shifting into a higher gear earlier to maximise torque on corner entry without getting wheel spin. With my racing driver excuses out of the way, it was time for another go. Using the aforementioned takeaways from the replays I watched, I was able to shave out 1.5 seconds, getting my down to a 1:26.5, well into silver. Gold time was still proving elusive, and I was still over a second off. But things were starting to click a bit more, and I was able to put down some faster laps consistently. I was gaining confidence with using the curbs and the chicanes more as well. Further improvements came, knocking a tenth off by my next run to get a 1:26.4. The challenge now was putting together a clean lap. I was improving in individual sectors, but then I would make a mistake and not end up setting a faster lap overall. Another attempt saw me make further gains, achieving my first 26.0. At this stage, improvements were still coming quite fast, and I was gradually climbing the leaderboard. At this stage, when you're knocking big chunks of time off, you gain thousands of positions in one go. I think my first time was something like 8,000th position, and at this point I'm in the top 6,000. The next goal was to shave off another 5 or 6 tenths to achieve gold, which at this stage felt totally possible. But this challenge was proving to be a bit trickier than I initially thought. I thought I would be able to get the gold time more quickly, and then could work on steadily improving and making my way up the leaderboard. I think this time trial really highlighted my limitations as a driver in Gran Turismo 7. I noticed that in tighter corners, I felt like I was not rotating the car enough mid-corner. This led me to needing to rotate the car more on corner exit, which would lead to me spinning out when trying to put the power down while the car is still turning. Looking back at my laps versus faster ones, I think this was due to trailing off the brakes too early and coasting in the mid-corner, causing understeer. Other than that, I felt like the middle section with the 2 chicanes is where I was losing the most time. This was probably to be expected, as this was the place where there was the most time to be gained or lost between a really good lap and a not so good one. Next, I decided to review a lap lower down the leaderboard, about a second faster than my own, rather than one of the top times. This would give me a more realistic idea of how to make the marginal improvements I needed. This lap wasn't using as much curb in the chicanes as the very top times, but was still maximising them more than I was. Also, the data logger, a feature I haven't used much in Gran Turismo 7, but is a great addition to the game for more sim-minded players like myself, confirmed again that I was not trail braking enough. On the subject of braking, I also felt that the ABS was interfering too much when I was braking, reducing braking force too much when applying even the slightest amount of steering. I usually set ABS to weak in GT7, as I assumed this would be the least interference. However, from doing some research, it seems that default is actually the optimal setting. You may be thinking that turning ABS off would offer the least interference, but when using no ABS in GT7, it's almost impossible to brake properly without locking up. I know GT3 cars have ABS in real life, but as far as I know, Super GT cars do not, so I know it would be more realistic not to use ABS, but still, I decided to make this change to see if it felt any better. Nearing the end of the first day, I wasn't improving any further and I was starting to feel more tired. So I decided to call it a day. Day 2 fell on a Friday night. After a few frustrating crashes, mostly thanks to those damn curbs, I did manage to improve to a 125.7, my best so far by some margin. I was getting tantalisingly close to gold now, only 3 or 4 tenths off. At this stage, improving does become more difficult once you have maximised all of the obvious stuff like lines, braking points, and gearing. Also, since awards are given based on the percentage gap to the top time, it was frustrating knowing that I only needed to improve by 0.38% in order to attain gold. Today also demonstrated how much of gaining lap time in time trials is an iterative process, slowly chipping away at time. On day 1 I was delighted to get a 27, but now only getting a 27 was disappointing. It's good in these moments to remind yourself how far you come in this process, where your previous best is now well below what you can achieve. Something I was still finding challenging was the last chicane before the hairpin. I found it very challenging to take enough curb on the left and carry the speed well over the curb on the right. I would either run too wide and invalidate the lap, or spin when trying to power out of the corner. After one more attempt, I didn't improve further on day 2, meaning we were still a few tenths away from the goal time. I think this demonstrates that I was rustier than I had initially hoped, and that making our way further at the leaderboard was going to be more difficult than I first thought. Over the weekend, a strange orange ball appeared in the sky radiating heat. This made sitting in the rig unbearably hot, so instead of playing Gran Turismo, I went to the beach. Following this flash of nice weather, my body decided it would be a great time to come down with a cold, from which I'm still recovering. Also, during this time, the goal time had been brought down further, due to the best now being a 122.8, 2 tenths faster than before. And then, it happened. I finally got the goal time, but only by 300ths, but still, I'll take it. The main breakthrough was taking more of the first curve on the first chicane. I think I became too obsessed with maximising cutting the grass on the second part to realise that there was actually so much to be gained on the first curb. On one of my previous attempts I got a 22.8 through the first split, 3 tenths quicker than previous attempts. Despite achieving the goal time, we're still only 2,855th on the leaderboard. To get anywhere near the top 100, we'll need to find over a second. This was going to be tough, but watching my best attempts so far, I can see that there's still time out there. Despite of finally getting a goal and breaking the 25.5 barrier, the lap certainly wasn't optimal. Putting together a cleaner lap that I know I'm capable of was now the goal. Call it racing driver excuses again, but feeling ill and having taken a couple of days off definitely weren't going to help me improve coming into day 3. Or at least that's what I thought. Day 3 started by doing an initial run, similar to day 1, to shake off the cobwebs and warm up a little bit. I didn't really go into it with any expectations. However, almost immediately I was on the pace, with my best so far being only a few hundredths off my previous best. I think in the previous session, after I got my best, I was trying too hard and overdriving the car to try and find more time, but it was having the opposite effect. Clearly I was on it today, and then I finally got a 25.2, good enough for the new goal time and our fastest so far by some margin. I really felt like celebrating. 3 tenths better than the goal time is far better than what I normally achieve in these time trials. But this time, impressive by my standards, still left us outside of the top 2,000, never mind the top 100. I tried to improve further, tried using the data logger and looking for faster laps, but I just couldn't gain any time trying to mimic their driving. The car just wouldn't do what I wanted to do taking those lines. I suppose you'd have to try those lines for a while and practice them, and the car feels so different when you drive like that. That's another thing about these time trials. You only have a limited window to improve, especially if you have a full-time job and other commitments. After this challenge, I have mad respect to anyone who has not only the skill but also the dedication to be consistently high up in events like these. So, to answer the question posed at the beginning of the video, how hard is it to get into the top 100 on GT7 in the time trials? Yeah, it's very hard. But yeah, there's always next time.